Alternative music, a term that has confused me my whole life. In fact, I think it might have been the first time I was truly confused about the meaning of a genre. If you had a similar childhood to me, you were probably also exposed to alternative music the same way I was, with radio stations like Alt Nation. It was a welcome alternative to the other stations my parents would put on, where it seemed like even the worst song there would be less annoying than hearing the same two songs played over and over again on the rock and pop stations. If I was ever given reign over what radio station to put on in the car, that would be my go-to. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I liked it a hell of a lot more than anything else on the radio. They'd play stuff like AWOL Nation, Arcade Fire, M83, Foster the People. It all kind of veered this line of not being what's played on the mainstream radio stations, but still pretty mainstream in sound, and all that kind of makes sense, right? You're thinking, how is this video so long? We solved it. It's over. 1 out of 10 yap sesh. But that was then. And the current state of alternative music is where it gets a lot more confusing. I want to get into the whole umbrella term of alternative, but first you need a little context of how it started, because it didn't start out as an umbrella term. And to get into what alternative is, first I gotta clarify that alternative and alternative rock are two different things. They're used pretty interchangeably, but a lot of the time when people use the term alternative, they mean alternative rock, kind of like just saying indie. If you don't put something after that, it's just kind of assumed what you're talking about is rock. Nirvana, Weezer, Red Hot Chili Peppers, all these rock artists that aren't exactly rock, and that's because alternative was originally a term coined in the 80s as a literal alternative to the mainstream rock of that time that was more like glam rock and hair metal. It was rock that came in with a different approach, more inspired by stuff like punk than metal, but also with a more grounded, kind of softer sound. It blew up in the 90s and was a huge movement where it basically encompassed anything that incorporated elements of other genres into rock. Stuff like No Doubt, The Cranberries, Foo Fighters, even Radiohead is a big one that's been lumped into this category. And there were a bunch of subgenres being born out of this too, like grunge and pop punk. But because it was such a huge wave at the time, it was all getting lumped into this mega umbrella term of alternative. Kind of like hyperpop these days. It's a thing that happens a lot when there's new sounds that emerge like this, where even though there's like 50 different genres in there, that's too much for the public to handle, and it's getting way too big to not have one term to describe it, so they just slap something like alternative on there and call it a day. It even got to the point where the Grammys, you know, the most trusted source of musical knowledge, started an alternative music award. And over time, that label of alternative rock sort of split off into just slapping alternative onto things like Gorillaz, 21 Pilots, even Tame Impala. And some of these made sense. I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but early Gorillaz sounds alternative. Not alternative rock, but alternative, you know? Alternative rock was basically the foundation, the seed that sprouted into the huge, confusing-ass tree of alternative music. Fast forward to the current year, and it's completely transcended the rock origins of the genre and become a pretty meaningless label, just kind of slapped on people not even near the rock genre, like Billie Eilish, Lana Del Rey, even Charli XCX has gotten the alternative label tacked on. Yes, Charli XCX, who is probably the most clear-cut example of pop or mainstream hyperpop, but I guess that's too much to say. Even my favorite album of all time, Know Now by Clarence Clarity, which is an insane R&B infused glitch pop album, is labeled in a lot of places as alternative. Probably because there's a guitar in the back somewhere. Can't hear it, but it's there. I mean, listen to this and tell me this is alternative. Oh, it is? I guess I was wrong. I'm sorry. Bye, guys. Just kidding, guys. You just got freaking blusted. Anyway, to get a clear statement on what alternative actually is, let's take a look inside of my favorite book, the dictionary. Take a look. It's in a book, a reading rainbow. According to Merriam-Webster, who I think is the most trusted dictionary source, alternative is music that is produced by performers who are outside of the musical mainstream, that is typically regarded as more eclectic, original, or challenging than most popular music, such as conventional rock, pop, or country, and that is often distributed by independent record labels. Okay, don't even get me started on that. I'm gonna pretend that part's not there. If you want to see a whole video about me yapping about the term indie music, I have one of those that you can go watch. But it's basically saying that alternative is essentially a middleman. When an artist makes something that has enough elements of an existing genre that you know it gets its influence from there, but it has gone off the rails of that genre to go do its own thing, and you don't know what to call it, which would kind of explain how people like Charlie XCX end up being labeled as alternative. I mean, by that definition, sure, she does bring a more eclectic sound to otherwise pretty safe mainstream pop music, so it's just one of those genres that you can kind of slap on the back of any other genre, and bam, it's a slightly different version of that genre. Pretty similar to indie being slapped onto genres like indie pop, indie rock, indie hip-hop, but in that case, it usually implies that it at least sounds DIY, even if it isn't, whereas alternative doesn't have to sound independent, just a little different, just a little alternative. And all that is cool, but how does that explain bands like Imagine Dragons being alternative? One of the most mainstream rock bands out there. Love them or hate them, they are not doing anything different and are about as mainstream as you can possibly get. In fact, let's take a look inside some of the biggest alternative playlists right now and see what they consider alternative. First, we got Essential Alternative, and this one looks pretty good. It looks like it makes sense. Gorillaz, Radiohead, Red Hot Chili Peppers, pretty much all the stuff that naturally comes to mind when you think of the term alternative. Now let's look at Alt Now, which is supposedly the face of current alternative music. The Black Keys, Joe, sure. Oh, 21 Pilots, Glass Animals, Hozier, Linkin Park, not to be that guy, but Linkin Park is new metal. Holy shit, it's everywhere. Alternative country, alternative pop, alternative R&B, alternative dance, alternative metal. Do people just not like the word experimental? There's some experimental prejudice going on here? I guess it does sound a little prettier. After all this digging into alternative, it's become pretty clear that it has a lot of meanings and can be taken a ton of different ways, but my overall interpretation is that alternative is music that is a little weirder than what's currently mainstream, but not weird enough to call it experimental. It just exists in that sweet spot of not being super basic, but not being too weird if you're not that adventurous. At least that's what it's supposed to mean, but I think we're at a state where if something's alternative, it just means it's an amalgamation of something and no one knew what to call it, which is why I think so many people like alternative music. It's sort of a catch-all term for anything even remotely inspired by rock elements and not super basic pop music. That's what I think alternative is, but at the end of the day, this is one of those things that everyone will have a different perspective on. I even asked you guys what you thought alternative meant, and the answers were all over the place. There were some really well thought out and interesting ones, like music from an alternate reality, and some crazy ones. Something that doesn't follow the norm of a genre and takes elements from multiple other genres, but not enough to classify it as a complete subgenre of what it takes from. Don't know where you got that idea from, but okay. Let me know in the comments what alternative means to you. Is it a real genre, or is it a psyop from big labels to make you feel like you're cooler than you actually are? Do you think it's fine putting stuff like Gorillaz and Imagine Dragons in the same genre, with new genre names coming out every other day now? I personally think the clock is ticking for a super broad term like this, and sooner or later there will be new genre names out there that better describe each specific sound. And obviously, people that have lives and don't obsessively look into this stuff will keep listening to alt stations and playlists because they know that's what they like, and that's totally cool. But I would advise that if you hear something that's labeled as alternative, really like it and want to find more of it, maybe look at what other genres it's labeled as and search for more of that, not alternative, or don't. But thanks for watching. If you liked the video, feel free to leave a like, and if you really like the video, hit the subscribe button. I love you. Bye.